You're listening to Consolidate That. Ukraine is my motherland. It is now under a savage attack by Russia. Ukraine is shielding Europe and the rest of the civilized world from Putin's barbaric aggression. Ukrainians are brave and effectively fighting back. Let's help. Make a donation to Armed Forces of Ukraine. Link is in the show notes. #StandWithUkraine.
Welcome back to Consolidate That, Ivan. It's great to see you again. How's everything been going?
Well, lots of exciting stuff at Galaxy. We're progressing with our employee-owned organization. There's a lot of exciting news coming out that way, but today I'm excited about our guest. We have Captain Rory. So Captain Rory Lubold, he achieved his rank of a captain in many probably areas of life, but we just call him Captain Rory. So Rory started in the U.S. Air Force as a computer programmer, flight test engineer, and systems analyst working on classified programs. After 15 years, he went to work for Hollywood post-production industry as a software and systems engineer and served in VP engineering and CTO positions. From there, as an entrepreneur, he started an IT service company to serve small to medium-sized businesses. Recently, after hearing about this game-changing veterinary consolidator, Galaxy Vets, he joined the organization as the Vice President of IT. Rory, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to open up a little bit with your story. I mean, it fascinates me every time that you talk about how your experience from military to Hollywood to now being in veterinary industry, how does that path connected the dots? And what was the most exciting on that journey?
Oh, very, very interesting question. So for me, I come from a military family. My father was military, so I was born overseas, spent a lot of time in Europe. Probably 10 of my first 15 years were in Europe. And so that broadening of seeing different cultures in different countries and learning, just to adapt and to enjoy and to embrace that was really a fun part of that journey. In the military, the Air Force was great for me joining that. And my father said to me, get commissioned if you join the military because you get to lead and they'll teach you how to lead, which I think is such an undervalued or underrated piece of any team or family. So when in the military, what I got to do was flight test for the Air Force, which was a really fun job. So we would instrument every aircraft, put on the instruments to track what we call real-time data. So we're flying, say, an F-22, for example, and we're pulling data out of that aircraft at milliseconds worth of data, and we're feeding that back down to our health and safety folks. And so what we're doing is we're tracking that information in the aircraft and pulling metrics and just keeping track of health and safety for the aircraft. Is he safe? Is he in a safe area? Are the modifications that we're doing working? And so the cool part about that was just lots of data, processing lots of data, looking at that information and seeing how well that fits into the health and safety of the aircraft. And then I also did classified programs with the Air Force, which was my primary job was to monitor Soviet aircraft, Flanker, Fulcrum, all the bomber class of aircraft, and know how capable they were of fighting our military. So coming up with tactics and analysis. So kind of big picture, just looking at synergy of an engagement. If there's a fight, how well do we fare? How to teach my pilots, how to fight and defend. And my brother-in-law was flying F-15s, and he said, "Hey, I get all the information you're giving us, but why don't you come out to what we call Red Flag, which is where the Air Force does their Top Gun school, effectively, and fly with us so I can kind of show you where rubber meets the ramp. All the things you want us to do, we want to show you how what you're putting down on paper, how it really applies to the real world." And I think that was hugely important because it translates to what we do, in actual practices, is all the things that we practice for and train and build plans for to implement them in actual hospitals. And then going into Hollywood was really cool because we got to build this worldwide distributed network of systems. So a good example and a good story was we were doing all the Star Wars shows, and we were converting Star Wars into 3D. And what we did in that process was we did this distributed render farm across the whole world. We had 17 companies in India. We had 4 companies in London, and we had companies all across North America. And we would set these guys up with this real-time tracking system that would say, here are shots and things that need to be worked on. So we would go up to the ranch and review some shots. And one of the cool things that we would look at would be, say, let's look at a shot and and he would say, okay, I want Chewbacca to be in the foreground of the shot, or I want to change the relationship of the objects. And then we would send that information out real time to our distributed group, and they would modify that. And by the time we finished that review of those shots, we'd have all the fixes back again for him to review, and then he'd review them, and then we get approval. So we had this really cool system that was distributed across the entire world of being able to do updates and changes real time, and being able to give the feedback back to review the shots at the end of the day. So I think those things consolidate, give me kind of a good perspective of the real-time world, what's happening in the hospitals, and how we apply that. And then my private company, when I did the MSP company, what we got to do was work in hospitals. So my son, Dr. Lubold, builds emergency hospitals, and we built a few of those with him, put in the technology to make the hospitals functional, but got the experience from him in the translation. And of course, he used SmartFlow, and his relationship with Dr. Ivan goes way back. But the cool thing was we got to take hospitals and clinics and apply that real world. Hey, let's keep them up and running. Let's support them from the IT perspective, and especially the 24-hour hospitals, right? That can't afford to be down. If they're triaging animals and the internet goes down, those things are huge for them. So being able to take all that experience and roll it into how we apply and support hospitals was a huge thing. And then hearing about from my son about Galaxy Vets, and not just the idea of a consolidator, but the idea of a consolidator who's very servant, who the whole idea for zero suicides and just pushing all the cool things that the company wanted to do, for me was like, this is a game changer. This would be fun to be part of.
That's so awesome. And with all that experience, now that I'm thinking about our industry and our data, when you have 30-year-old PIMS, and then you're pulling this garbage data that can't be normalized, and then you're looking at the P&L of your quarter 3 weeks after the quarter passed, and then even if you get the right information, then you can't really do anything with it because we're already into the next quarter. So it kind of makes me think that you're a little overqualified for our industry. But hopefully, with your help, we can bring it all into more real time and serve the data. But so, what do you think about the data source? I mean, you've seen the different industries with this. I mean, from the military, what you were doing probably there is still way better than what we do in the hospitals today. So, do you see the vet medicine having an opportunity to improve? We have a big problem. We don't have enough vets. We don't have enough techs. Do you think that using and leveraging technology and data, we can actually accelerate things and become more efficient?
I do, and it's that really precarious balance between IT as a service and IT as a hindrance. And so what we try to look at is what's the functional job, and I love the idea that we have at Galaxy Vets is saying let's do this design thinking this Galaxy way. Look at what your problem is to understand it fully. As technology people, we have a tendency to say, oh, I know the answer. I've got the perfect idea, without understanding the stakeholders, the people who we're really trying to solve that problem for. So what you guys have introduced into the solution for the problem is to back up a little bit and think about the problem in a much better context of the stakeholders. And so the people that you're trying to solve the problem for help us so much. And the couple of things that we've done have changed direction because of that input. So what we're doing is taking the technology and saying, how can I give them better tools to do what they do? Because as we know, very typically, veterinarians practices in hospitals aren't probably the most technically capable people because they're focused on serving and taking care of animals. So how can we help them is a very important process to socialize that change first, to help them understand what we're trying to do, but more importantly, understand what they're trying to do on their daily job. And I think the value here is having an inside track with my son, especially knowing how hospitals work, being in the heart of that process, especially ER, on the triage mode. And as you know, Dr. Ivan, having been there, you're in this 911. I'm trying to save lives, and then now something's not working, or we're forcing a change on them. So I think understanding really what you're trying to do in the hospital, and making sure that workflow as we apply it solves the problem and helps and doesn't exacerbate them. That's the biggest challenge.
What do you think from we have a couple hospitals now that joined us, and then what your team has done and done very well is analyze the hospital where they're at. Do you think that as they're joining us, and in general, is there an opportunity for hospitals to be a little better protected from the data security side of things? And do you think that from general sort of IT infrastructure in the clinics, where they're at today? Because we partner with very good clinics, but sort of in that slice and what you've seen with other hospitals that you've built with Dr. Rory, I mean, he built new hospitals, so everything was new in there. But what do you see in the veterinary medicine? Do you think that that could be improved?
Very, very much so. And a great example in one of our hospitals is they were compromised ransomware attack. And what happens is they're so focused on day-to-day operations, keep the hospital functioning and moving. And what we're finding looking at hospitals is we're seeing that the technology in the hospitals is more traditionally, especially in smaller hospitals, mom and pops, they start out as a small practice, they grow, and that's that restaging, and that's that stopping and taking a look at their technology and saying, okay, where are we vulnerable at? What are the risks as we acquire and partner with that hospital? And being able to socialize that change. So we're gonna, like for example, one of the hospitals, we're gonna change a little bit of their security and enforce some little bit tighter security standards so they're not as vulnerable. And as we start to protect them, and I think socializing that change and helping them understand the value, and then rolling that out in a very controlled process is super huge. So you're absolutely correct. They're very different, every hospital, enough of a difference that we need to just say, this is our template on what works really well for hospitals. And then how do we apply that template to them to protect them? And as in one of your tenets for Galaxy is it's data protection and privacy by design. And GDPR is a great example of that standard does well for us. And it's interesting because GDPR doesn't just apply to the EU, the 27 member countries. It applies to any country that is impacted economically, which includes a lot of other countries in Europe. There's a GDPR for UK and for the rest of the EU. But what's important for us is if we lead by example, if we put in place and follow these standards that aren't mandated by our industry right now, I think it sets us to be better protected. And if we do that in the correct way, I think we create an environment that lets people focus on work, and we're not as subject to those attacks. They're going to happen everywhere, right? We know that nobody's vulnerable from those attacks or completely vulnerable. We're just going to increase our protection for those, and we're going to do GDPR because one of the good things that about GDPR says if you handle European, any of our member countries' data, you're subject to that law. And so I think that your initial tenet that says, hey, we need to do a good design security model is perfect for this because it will set us up early to have the infrastructure in place, and it will be easy to carry that and protect that. And like I said, the industry doesn't require that we do that. CCPA, for example, the California Consumer Privacy Act, the GDPR covers that as well. It's an overarching piece for that. So I think we're really well set to protect our customers in the hospitals.
It's interesting as you're talking about that a little bit because on a previous episode, Ivan and I had on Clint Latham from Luca, who's very, very, very big into the data security side of things, and he scared me enough into rushing out and turning on all of my password savers and doing all of that. So he was very valuable in that sense, and he had some really interesting ideas that are different in the space. And then also coming from a background of the PIMS world where I worked at Hippo, which the name Hippo is a play on HIPAA, but for animals. It's kind of interesting to think about how that data comes in place. You talked about, is IT a friend or a foe for the veterinarians? I think traditionally, right, in a lot of industries, it's considered somewhat of a foe, or sort of the checkbox that we have to take and keep them happy. What do you think are some big things that people are already doing right now that they could change to make their lives a little bit easier so that IT is not that foe that they're looking at?
That's a really cool question. So one of the things that we're very strong on is password management. And password management, as we know, is always a bane for everybody. They're like, I don't want to do password management. It's too hard. And what's the value in doing that? And what we see is attacks happen where someone, if you look on the dark web, we can do dark web scans, and we can look and say, hey, is my information out there anywhere? And what happens is once one of my passwords gets out there, what the cyber criminals do is they just grab that and look at all the other accounts I have and see if they can break in. So if I'm using that same password across multiple accounts, they're going to get access to that data. And we've seen that happen on a number of occasions where that happens. So the password manager thing is probably one of the high things on our list, because what it does is it allows you to use password complexity, meaning you have complex passwords that are very likely not to be hacked. It allows you to enforce some password standardization in the hospital. So, for example, one of your technicians leaves, and you can change the passwords that are accessing common accounts like your PIMs very easily, transparently to everybody, and you never miss a beat. You don't get the relief doctor that comes on site and goes, I can't get into the PIMs, I can't do my job. You don't get hacked and attacked by the person that left the company. You're not vulnerable in those spaces. So password security is a big value add for us to do that. And so I think that's one of the first things we push. And then multi-factor authentication. We've been talking about that within Galaxy recently, and that's really huge because it allows you to say, hey, I trust this device. You do the two-factor authentication once, and then if somebody else anywhere in the world tries to connect using your account, it says, hey, Ryan, there's someone trying to connect on your account. If this was you, okay. If it wasn't you, here's a warning for you, and you let IT know. So those two things are probably the first two things that we implement. But the other piece I'd say is really cool is the R&D team in our company has been long working on analyzing and assessing each software package that they use, whether a development package or an application, and they run a full set of checks against compliance to make sure that those things are safe and secure. So we've got some really cool things that we're standing up in the company and some real value for that. And I think what happens is the hospitals will start seeing those results because they'll be able to get into their PIMs more quickly from the password side. They won't have to be doing as much typing and access requests as they wanted to, and they'll see that value. And we'll see the number of hacks or attacks reduced because they get blocked.
Do you mean that we can't anymore put the sticky note next to the computer with the password written on it?
That's the first thing I do when I go into hospitals. I flip up a keyboard and look at it, right? And I look on the back of the monitor or open the desk and see where the passwords are at.
Yeah, it's the same for the drug cabinet as well, which requires double key that hangs on the nail next to the safe. So that's also you commonly see. I want to switch gears just a little bit because your experience in managing distributed teams is tremendous. So you work with so many teams that are remote, but also in different countries, and you picked up seamlessly teams. You have team in US, you have people in Ukraine. You're managing them all simultaneously. What do you think is important when you're managing multicultural teams, multi-time zone? Like, what are the sort of key things that you consider when you're thinking about, okay, I need to, step into this role where there will be people from different cultures, different time zones, different countries, different backgrounds?
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And that's probably the part of my job I like the most, or I love that part of it, because I get to engage with people whose perspectives are different. And for me, it's empathy. It's understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it, and understanding what their level of engagement is. And so when I talk to teams all over the world, one of the things I try to do is adjust to do some of the things in their time zone. So for example, from my time zone to UA to the Ukraine is 10 hours different. Our first meeting was this week at 3 a.m. in the morning, but it was the entire team. And the cool thing about that was they're like, why are you here at 3 a.m.? And I said, because for me, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon your time, and you guys are wide awake, and I'm not asking you to compromise and adjust your times, because I want to embrace the team, to know them, and be able to welcome them into the fold. And if I can understand, and the other piece of what's super important on the empathy side is also honesty, and just saying, hey guys, here's where we're at, here's the things we need to do, and embrace that with them, to understand what they're trying to do. And like you had mentioned, is we'll probably do some adjustments of how well we do things, and add better value into the company as we progress. And that's that maturity model. It's us knowing that as we add hospitals and we pivot to get more engaged with the hospitals, and to help the teams that maybe are in different time zones to feel more engaged with the hospitals, and to understand what the rest of the company does. So I think empathy, I think honesty for them is super important, and understanding what they do, and understanding what their skill sets are, and being able to appreciate the differences between us, and not let those cause barriers, but let those be really cool engagements.
That's awesome.
A segue for that, right? A good way to engage with people is by sharing ideas and thoughts and books. So I'm curious um, if you had some recommendations of books or podcasts or TED Talks that you would recommend that some people dive into to be able to learn a little bit more about how you think and things that you've found powerful. What are some things you'd recommend to people?
Yeah, that's awesome. And what's fun for me was not growing up, but my first job out of the Air Force was Southern California. And just the cultural differences in Southern California from anywhere across the US was interesting, right? And so what I loved to do there was I had this long drive. The commute was only 22 miles away, but it was an hour and a half each day, each way. So I would listen to books on tape, if you will, back then, and CDs. But I love to listen to like Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey was great because he had just these great ideas, the 7 habits of highly effective people. And he was one of the guys that kind of started that whole movement. And so that book was great. And I like Jack Welch, the CEO of GE, because Jack was the kind of guy that was a maverick. He was way outside the box. Now, there's some things I don't agree with what he does, but he had some really cool ideas on how to take GE as a company and turn that company and change that. Their financial group, he took them from a fledgling financial group to one of the top 5, I think they were at. So the cool thing was Welch from the gut was the outlier to run the company. But I think because he was such a maverick and different guy, and not a maverick in a bad way, but a maverick in saying outside the box, we should do things differently. He changed some really cool things at GE. And probably my most popular guy is Simon Sinek. And I've listened to Simon for a long time, and I love his Leaders Eat Last. The story about, the A-10 pilots. If you guys haven't heard, that's phenomenal. And it's the military. And the one thing that's my takeaway from that book is, in the military, we teach ourselves and we teach everybody in the military to sacrifice yourself so that others may gain. In the private sector, we teach ourselves to sacrifice others so that you may gain. We kind of have that backwards. And I think what I'm seeing, especially for us in the company, is let's flip that around. Let's do this right. So I love Simon Sinek, and his presentations are always spot on. He's got some great podcasts as well.
Well, amen to that. Hopefully, one day he'll be talking about us in his books or his podcast, because I think we are doing something different and we are focused on people, not in a way that, because we have to talk this way today, but fundamentally all our processes and the culture and everything is built around people first organization, and it pays. And our sort of, again, I'm so excited about our recent developments and finding out that we can have actually a very unique business model because we're focused on people. So that's more to come. But Captain, always a pleasure. Very excited to have you on the team, and thank you for finding the time on Friday.
Thank you very much. This was awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Roy. Thank you so much for listening to Consolidate That. If you want to hear our new episodes, please find us on any podcast platform. Also, you can learn more about us on our website at vetintegrations.com.